$20,000 feels like a turning point. It's the number where people stop feeling broke. It's the number where your bank account finally looks respectable. You open your app, you see that balance, and something shifts in your mind. You think, I'm doing okay now. And that thought, that exact moment, is where things start to go wrong. Because 20,000 is not safety. It's not freedom. It's not even stability. It's a psychological trap disguised as progress. It's just enough money to make you feel comfortable, but not enough to make you secure. And that gap between feeling secure and actually being secure is where bad decisions are born. At 0, you're alert. At 1,000, you're careful. At 5,000, you're still paying attention. But somewhere around 20,000, your behavior changes. You relax. You stop optimizing. You start thinking in terms of what you can afford instead of what you should protect. That's the shift. Not in your income, not in your financial reality, but in your mindset. You move from defense to consumption without realizing it. And the problem is 20,000 cannot support that mindset. It's not built for it. It's a buffer, not a foundation. But people treat it like a milestone that gives them permission to loosen discipline. And once that permission is granted, the leak begins. You start upgrading small things. Nothing dramatic. That's what makes it dangerous. A slightly better apartment, a slightly nicer phone, more convenience, more eating out, more I've earned this decisions. Individually, none of these look like mistakes. They feel justified. They feel proportional to your progress. But collectively, they shift your burn rate upward. And once your burn rate goes up, your margin disappears. And margin is everything. Without margin, you're one unexpected expense away from reversing all that progress. A medical bill, a car repair, a slow month, a job change. Suddenly that 20,000 isn't a milestone anymore. It's a cushion being eaten in real time. The real danger is that this doesn't feel like regression. It feels like life improving. That's why people don't catch it early. They think they're moving forward because their lifestyle is improving. But lifestyle improvement without structural strength is just a delayed setback. You're not building a system that holds wealth. You're building a system that consumes it more efficiently. And 20,000 is exactly the amount where this illusion becomes convincing. It's enough to justify upgrades, but not enough to absorb the consequences of those upgrades long term. There's also a deeper psychological layer to this number. At 20,000, you start identifying as someone who is good with money. Not excellent, not disciplined, but good enough. And that identity is dangerous because it lowers your standards. You stop doing the small things that got you there. You stop tracking as closely. You stop questioning purchases. You rely more on feeling than on numbers. And feeling is unreliable. Feeling tells you that you're safe because the balance looks healthy. But the balance is a snapshot, not a system. It tells you nothing about sustainability. It tells you nothing about how long that money will last under your current behavior. If you break it down, 20,000 is not a large number in real-world terms. In many places, it covers a few months of expenses, maybe less. It's not enough to survive a major disruption. It's not enough to generate meaningful passive income. It's not enough to create real optionality. But it's enough to trick you into thinking you've crossed into a different category of financial life. And once you believe that, your behavior starts to match that belief. You act like someone who has more than they actually do. And that gap between perception and reality is where the damage accumulates. Another problem is opportunity cost. When people hit 20,000, they often let the money sit. It becomes a comfort number, something they don't want to disturb. So instead of deploying it intelligently or continuing to build aggressively, they freeze. They hover around that number for months, sometimes years, not growing significantly, not declining dramatically, just stuck. And that stagnation is expensive. Because money that isn't moving with purpose is slowly losing value, either to inflation or to missed opportunities. You're not losing it visibly, but you're losing what it could have become. At the same time, people become more tolerant of inefficiencies, subscriptions they don't need, higher recurring expenses, slightly overpriced choices that don't feel worth optimizing anymore, because mentally they've moved out of scarcity mode. But they haven't earned the right to operate without efficiency. That's the mistake. Efficiency is not something you abandon once you have a buffer. It's what allows the buffer to turn into something meaningful. Without it, the buffer stays small or disappears. There's also the comparison effect. At 20,000, you start comparing yourself to people who are ahead of you. People with investments, assets, businesses. And instead of using that comparison as motivation to build, many people use it as justification to accelerate their lifestyle to match what they see. They skip steps. They try to look like the next level before they've built it. And that usually involves spending. Better clothes, better environments, better experiences, all funded by a number that cannot support that level of behavior. So instead of compounding upward, they flatten out or move backward. The safer way to think about 20,000 is not as a destination, but as a fragile checkpoint. It's proof that you can accumulate money. That's valuable. But it's not proof that you can keep it, grow it, or protect it under pressure. Those are different skills. And they require a different mindset. Instead of relaxing at that number, you should become more structured, more intentional, more focused on systems than on feelings. Because this is the stage where small habits either scale into real wealth or collapse back into instability. If you handle this stage correctly, 20,000 becomes the base of something much larger. It becomes the beginning of momentum. But if you handle it incorrectly, it becomes a ceiling. A number you reach repeatedly but never surpass in a meaningful way. And you'll tell yourself you're making progress because you keep getting back to it. But in reality, you're cycling. Earning, spending, rebuilding, repeating. That loop feels like growth, but it is. It's maintenance. Real progress at this level comes from tightening, not loosening. From protecting margin, not expanding lifestyle. From increasing your rate of accumulation, not stabilizing at a comfortable number. It comes from continuing to act like someone who is building, not someone who has already built something. Because the moment you switch roles too early, the system breaks. The inflow no longer outpaces the outflow. And once that happens, the number starts to shrink. So the danger of 20,000 is not the number itself. It's what it does to your behavior. It changes how you think, how you spend, how you justify decisions. It gives you confidence without giving you capacity. And confidence without capacity leads to overextension. You take on more than your financial structure can handle. Not in one big decision, but in a series of small ones that feel harmless, until they're not. The disciplined approach is simple but not easy. You treat 20,000 as if it's still not enough. Not in a negative way, not in a scarcity mindset, but in a realistic way. You recognize that it's a start, not a solution. You keep your systems tight. You keep your expenses controlled. You keep building. Because the goal is not to reach a number once. The goal is to reach a level where your system produces numbers like that consistently, without stress, without resets, without starting over. And that only happens if you survive the most dangerous phase, which is the phase where you feel comfortable before you are actually secure. That gap is where most people stall out. Not because they lack ability, but because they relax too early. They let a temporary win change their long-term behavior. And once that happens, progress slows down or reverses, even if income stays the same or increases. So if you're sitting around that number right now, the worst thing you can do is feel like you've made it. You haven't. You've proven you can start. Now you need to prove you can continue. And continuation is built on discipline that doesn't change just because the balance looks better. If anything, it becomes more important. Because now the stakes are higher. Now you have something to protect, something to grow, something that can either become a foundation or disappear quietly over time. And that's the real difference. Not the number in your account, but the behavior that surrounds it. Because numbers come and go. Behavior compounds. And at 20,000, your behavior is either about to level up or quietly betray you.